wanted to begin by thanking everyone for joining us on this webinar today on the topic of tech innovation within the public sector. We have a great panel lined up. We also have an incredible audience members joining us from all three levels of government, NGOs, crown corporations, nonprofits, as well as from the private sector. So it should be a great discussion with a lot of incredible stakeholders who joined us at noon today. So as always, here at Queen's University, we'd like to begin by acknowledging the fact that Queen's University, both our Kingston-based campus and our Toronto facility for the School of Business, are located on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. So we just like to acknowledge the fact that we are very grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. A quick agenda for what we'll be discussing today, and really the cadence of today's webinar. We'll begin with an introduction around the topic of the need for digitalization and digital transformation within all levels of government. Then we'll transition into a discussion, a Q&A, moderated Q&A with our panelists. We will open the Q&A up to audience members, so please feel free to type in your questions that you have into the Zoom function here, and we'll be able to address some questions from the audience towards the end of the webinar before we wrap up promptly before 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in about an hour or so from now. So while today's discussion will really be centered around the topic of digital transformation within the public sector specifically, today's webinar is sponsored by the Master of Digital Product Management program here at Queen's University. So if you like the tenor of the conversation today and you think that you might be interested in learning more about the Master of Digital Product Management program specifically, we would certainly encourage you to register for our next general information session webinar that's scheduled for noon on Monday. You can go ahead and register for the session on the program website. It's free to do so. And during that webinar, we will be discussing the program, the schedule, the curriculum, the coaching opportunities, the team-based delivery, all the nuts and bolts of the program in more detail next Monday if you're interested in joining us for that, which we hope that some of you will. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and introduce my boss, Dr. Kathryn Brohman. She is the director of the Master of Digital Product Management program here at Queen's University. She's also an associate professor and distinguished faculty fellow of digital technology at this business school as well. When she's not conducting research, publishing articles, attending international conferences, and leading the Master of Digital Product Management program, Kathryn does also conduct a great deal of consulting external to the university. And specific to today's topic, Kathryn has been leading several tech innovation initiatives within the healthcare sector since 2015. She has also worked very closely with various levels of government and several ministries, including the Ministry of Farming and Architecture and the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs, to develop and implement positive digital innovation strategies for those ministries. So she's well positioned to lead and moderate the discussion today. So at this point, Kathryn, I'll pass it over to you to get us started here with the introduction.
Sure. Thanks, Connor. Nice to meet everyone. Just a bit of, before I introduce our panelists. So when I was actually on faculty down in the United States, I didn't do work with the government at all. And when I came back to Canada in 2003, one of the first people I met in one of my executive programs was Stephane. And him and I had great conversations about, at that time he was working at Passport, I think was his jam at that time. But we were talking a lot about, basically I asked him the question, why would you want to work in government if you know a lot of things about technology innovation in the early 2000s? I didn't sense that in my career, I'd seen a lot of very talented kind of people wanting to change government, yet Stephane was one of these people that had great skills and talent and technology, but he chose to spend his career in government. And through that conversation, I learned a lot about why people really do double down and spend their career within government sectors. And part of that really intrigued my own work. So at the time I was working with the casino industry in Las Vegas, and I decided to make a shift into really focus on how my talent and my research could actually influence sort of sectors of government. And the thing that intrigued me the most is I have learned over the last 20 years that if government doesn't have an ability to digitalize what they do, it makes it really difficult for everyone else to do what we need to do. So specifically, I focus in an area in integrated health. A great example of that is that all of these little tech companies can try to influence paramedics and primary care physicians. But if Ontario Health and at the broader level, federal mandates around, data and how things work don't actually come to the table, we can't progress. And that is really where this idea of tech innovation in government came from. Stephane and I, a couple of years ago, now he's on the board with our master's program here. And we sort of have a conversation about how we can better skill up or help to skill up, these digital skills within government to really help everybody else enable these ecosystems and collaborations. And so this is a really unique panel because I'll introduce them in a second here, but we have Stephane, of course, who has sort of been the person in my mind in the last 20 years that has inspired me in this area. And then, we actually have one of our own students who's come into the program. So Ruta, who I'll introduce in a second. And then in our last conversation, Stephane was like, hey, maybe I can get Raj. And he actually came, who's the Executive Vice President of Shared Services Canada, which I think for many of us as just lowly citizens, we just really depend on Raj and his team to be able to navigate all the things that we do. And so I will go back, Connor, the slide before. The big thing for me when I think about what digitalization in government looks like, oftentimes it looks like web pages like this, right? The people who don't know what's going on, we open up a web page like this and it says, government in the digital age, and it has all these different, initiatives that are trying to inspire how we work with other people, right? How we communicate with the government, how we think about innovation, right? Thinking about the idea of how we actually build skills. But this is really what the government defines for us at a very, very high level. And so that's kind of what we wanted to focus on was the questions that I put together today. It'll just be a panel discussion, really. But what we really want to focus on is what's behind these mandates? Like, what do the conversations look like within government? And what inspires, like, for us reading these things, what's sort of the motivation and the vision behind tech innovation in government? And that's sort of where we're going to start with the Q&A. The big thing for us, though, is that we've come up with 4 questions. All of you on the webinar today, we would love to hear your questions. So please do use the Q&A button. There's lots of panelists here. All of them will be speaking. While they're not speaking, they can type. So you might actually find them answering those questions in the back channel. But we do encourage this to be as interactive as it can be. And so Connor, next slide, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead now and actually introduce each of the panelists. And once I do, sort of talk about each of them, they're going to come off mute and introduce themselves. So the first person that I'm going to introduce you to is Stephane Cousineau. So as I mentioned earlier, he was kind of one of the first people I met when I came back to Canada. He's now the senior assistant deputy minister, People and International Platform, Global Affairs Canada. But the one thing about Stephane is if you look at his LinkedIn, he has worked through many sectors of the government and at the core of a lot of changes around, passport elections. I think at one point he was with FinTrack. There's a whole bunch of stuff that he's done within the government. The second person I'm going to ask to come off is Ruta. So Ruta Fluxgold, she came to us a few months back. She's the Director, Regulatory Innovation and Management Systems at Environment and Climate Change Canada. She'll be joining our class at the beginning of September. And so she's going to talk to us a little bit about what motivated her right into this tech innovation space, and then can speak more to our program if anybody has any questions about why she's taking the program. And then last, of course, we've got Raj Thuppal, who's Executive Vice President, Shared Services Canada. So Stephane, if you don't mind, come off mute and introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll go to Ruta and then to Raj.
So good afternoon, everyone. And let me start by saying a big thank you to Queen's University, Kathryn, for welcoming us for this great panel. As Kathryn has mentioned, I'm the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of the People and International Platform. You might wonder what that is. To make it simple, I manage essentially corporate services / common services and infrastructure for all our 182 missions around the world, 110 countries, essentially enabling and supporting the different programs, whether it's development or trade for our department. As mentioned also by Kathryn, I've been in a couple of departments. I had the great pleasure to work with my dear colleague that you're going to hear about, Raj Thuppal at Shared Services Canada. And when we talk about technology, if there's one place that this is taking place, it's certainly at Shared Services Canada. So I'm sure Raj will have good insight for us. So really very much looking forward to participate to this panel. Thank you, Kathryn.
Thank you. And over to Ruta.
Hi there, thanks so much. Yes, so as Kathryn mentioned, I am going to be entering the program in September of 2025. I'm currently the Director of Regulatory Innovation Management Systems. What that means at the moment is that I am leading a business process modernization for the Environmental Protection Branch, which is the branch that holds all the regulations and legislation related to chemicals, chemical management, fisheries. And we are looking at building a system to help all of our stakeholders comply with regulations. So really always excited to talk about digital enablement in this space and how it links into actually ensuring that our policy and program objectives are met and communicated to the public.
Excellent. Thanks, Ruta. The one word that Ruta uses the multiple times, and you always use it, and I'm always like, man, I should use that word more, is digital enablement. Because I do think oftentimes we think about innovation in this crazy sphere of, but I think to Ruta's point, sometimes the role of digital is just to enable the things we're already doing. And so I really do appreciate that word, Ruta, and maybe even next year we'll put it in the title. All right. So last, certainly but not least, I'll turn it over to Raj.
Thank you, Kathryn. Again, thank you very much to Queen's University and to Stephane for giving me this opportunity to be on this panel. Very excited to be here and share the panel with Ruta and Stephane. And currently, I'm Executive Vice President at Shared Services Canada. Shared Services Canada, we provide infrastructure services for most of the government departments. And our motto right now is we deliver digital together. So we enable all departments to deliver digital services to Canadians and also for employees of Government of Canada. Prior to coming here, I was at National Defence as the CIO. And before that, as the Chief Digital Officer at Transport Canada. And before that, I had a pleasure of working with Stephane at Shared Services Canada. So we spent a lot of time together here at Shared Services. So very happy to be here and looking forward to the next hour.
Great. Thanks, Raj. And so again, before we kick things off, I think the big thing we want to do is thank the three of you. I think, it's panels like this where just citizens of the country feel that there's great opportunity, in terms of where we're headed as a country. And so, again, spending your lunch hour with us is very much beneficial to not only us as a university, but to everyone on the call. So I am going to start the first question with Ruta, actually, because I think it goes back to our whole point about her word around enablement and this innovation kind of, maybe it's sort of an idea of how we frame a lot of these things about what we do. But the question is, what is the goal of tech innovation in the public sector? So when you take a look at that slide that I showed, what is really behind those digital mandates from your perspective?
Yeah, and it's funny that you picked up on that, Kathryn, because when I was thinking about that, I like in terms of the word innovation, for me, like the department that I work at and departments that I've worked at in the future, innovation often really just looks like actually developing and implementing an IT project that makes Canadians' lives and interaction with the public service easier, and with the level of technology enabling or online services that they already expect from most of the other businesses or companies that they deal with. There are so many legacy issues to tackle, and these often compete with newer and shinier priorities in the government space. And that impacts our ability to digitalize both sort of newer processes, but also the ones that probably a lot of people use, but are sort of those ones that have to happen, but sometimes people forget about. You know, we're a massive organization, so that's not totally unexpected. I think for me, innovation in the space would really be about enabling people to rapidly develop and enable a service. And by service, I'm talking very broadly. So for me, that services are the ability for Canadian companies and individuals to comply with our regulations, right? And then to be able to onboard in an enterprise way new programs as they come along instead of having more purpose built. I think with no code, low code, that gives us a little bit more space. I think also the innovation is sometimes hampered by a lack of integration between policy programs and IT. And that's why part of the reason why I decided to take this program is as a policy and program person for most of my career. This is the third time now that I've had to work with our IT colleagues to deliver something to actually deliver the service to Canadians. And I just, I think that there's not a lot of common language between those groups. So, you know, innovation would be building the language or the space for those groups to come together and to rapidly work on things and not take 2 to 3 years just to have sort of the first release ready. So maybe I'll just leave it there and pass it back to you.
So many great insights there. I think it's interesting. I'll always kind of use Stephane as my anchor because he knows me and he knows that by the end, I'm always intrigued. It's like I have a question I need to ask. But I think what really drew me out of that, what you said, Ruta, is the idea of, you know, the fact that, you know, government's set up in these silos and, you know, this big difference between policy and technology. And it's hard to navigate innovation because digital innovation tends to go across all those things, coming at, you know, problems that are defined by what citizens have, or like you're saying, you know, environment looks, you know, protecting our environment touches so many different aspects of government from your world. And so I think innovation really comes down to process, right? As opposed to just kind of some people thinking about technology innovation as sitting in a little digital lab coming up with some new piece of technology. It's a little bit harder to get these things to implement and then, to your point, draw out the benefits, which, you know, in many sectors are as simple as just cost reduction, you know, to look at us having a sustainable government moving forward. So excellent. Thanks for kicking us off. And so, Raj, do you want to add to your perspective to that question?
That's great. Thanks, Kathryn. Again, very much in agreement with what Ruta has said. I would maybe add a couple of things. One is if you look at government services, it is the services we provide to Canadian citizens, but there's also stewardship that happens within the government in reporting to the Parliament. So in the front end services that we provide, I think the tech innovation or digital innovation is to convert those manual processes and make it more digital, which means more user friendly. People can apply it from anywhere. You don't have to physically go to a location, whether it is licensing, whether it is benefits that you need. I mean, we see that in many areas right now where a lot of the services are becoming more and more digitally enabled. And that's kind of one a significant area of where the government services are moving towards. And again, government is in this space. We are not an R&D organization. While we do have R&D that is looking at specific areas to modernize and stuff like in NRC and National Research Council, in the National Defense, in the DRDC areas, I think in the digitization space, we use technology that is already available in the market, applied to our current processes to reduce the time it takes, improve user experience, and actually give users what they are getting from the private sector. If you look at banks, if you look at the utilities, they're all moving towards a digital services, and then government is actually kind of, we want to mimic that experience. That's the front end of it. I think a lot of data that we collect from these interactions, the amount of time it takes, whether it's for passports or other services or benefits, the data tells us a lot. And how do we use this data to actually improve services, to improve the delivery of the services, improve the cost efficiency, and amount of time it takes to actually do stuff. How do we reduce it? I think a lot of that is also very beneficial with the digitization. So I think quite a bit of work happening across government on both areas, and also the services within Government of Canada to, again, like everyone, everybody is short of resources and money. So how do we do the stuff that we do in a more efficient way? And how can we use technology to be able to do that? Again, it's application of technology that is available to improve the services that we provide either internally or externally is kind of where most of the work is happening today. And again, it's pretty exciting to be part of this journey right now.
Excellent. Well, and I think it was, I did actually, in advance of this webinar, Raj, take a look at the Shared Services Canada website and understand just what you publish with regard to what your strategy is. And I wrote down in my notes here that what's really behind your digital mandates is just to make our life easier. And I think as a citizen, you just kind of like, man, sometimes that can be just so simple. But then you also called attention to the fact that you could be this data stream. You can be the data stream, because actually, I think as a custodian of our data, we would rather the government have it than some tech company that we don't know what they're going to do with it. And so there's so much opportunity, I think, in terms of just on both fronts, not only making our lives easier, but also protecting us from this world of uncertainty in all that goes on with the big tech companies. So and what was interesting for me was knowing Stephane's career. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe some of his things like elections and passport, he's made my life easier. But admittedly, there's been parts of his career where I was like, I don't know how I get impacted by what Stephane does. And so I'm really intrigued to know from his perspective, going through as many different positions as he's held in government, and you too, Raj, but that has to look differently, right? Like there has to be mandates within government that don't all speak to just making our lives better. So Stephane, how would you answer this question about what's really behind a lot of these mandates that we see come out of government?
Yeah, so I'm going to do a bit about pursuit from a lot of good points that Raj has mentioned, and on how I'm contributing to you specifically, Kathryn, and services. Get lost in Mexico, lose your passport, and you'll know right away how I'm actually helping you directly. But in all seriousness, just like I don't want to repeat what Raj has said, but as you can see, the goal of tech innovation in the government is very broad, right? But to try to simplify this, I think that the aim is to actually enhance efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, and increase the engagement with citizens, right? Definitely there's that aspect. And practically what it means from a digital mandate is we want to drive to modernize government operations, streamline processes, improve service delivery. Raj touched on that, but ultimately we're looking at an approach where we can better meet the needs of Canadian citizens in a very increasingly digital world as we know it, right? Additionally, I would say, just to add to the complexity of what we have to do, is as part of our digital agenda, we need to continue to enhance data security, data privacy, which is very important. But also, and I picked up a question in the chat, we absolutely need to focus on promoting accessibility and inclusivity when it comes to those government services. So overall, I'd say the underlining intention is truly to harness the power of technology to create a more responsible, accountable, and most importantly, Canadian citizen-centric government services as we move forward.
And I think, Stephane, you raise a really great point, because it's interesting that in the open discussion, the first thing we fall on are the projects that struggle within government. They get all this press. And I think that it's very interesting perspective to recognize that no matter what you do in government, you will always be under the microscope. And so those kind of practices around, to your point, inclusive procurement, whatever that means, I mean, so much of that happens within governments having to adhere to those processes of accessibility and, diversity and inclusion. And a lot of these, you can't just greenwash those things. You have to actually act in that. And that's what I think makes government innovation and government so challenging, because it's that tension between what risks do we take and how can we move fast, yet still adhere to all of these principles. And I think that that creates a real need for, you know, people to really hone the craft around agility and how that gets practiced. And so there are a few other questions in the chat that I do want to get to, because I think, you know, oftentimes, you know, we have 4 questions and then the audience comes up with better ones. But I do think this one is an interesting. So Aaron talks about the CEO of Air Canada talking about their digital transformation and rebuilding through the pandemic. And his answer was know your audience. The extra complexity brought in by digital products tends to provide barriers to seniors and those with cognitive disabilities without support. And so I do think that this is a great question for Raj, if you don't mind, because I think the question is, do you feel that accessibility is lost in some of these innovations and prioritized over other maybe objectives that you're trying to work toward? Raj, yeah. Oh, did we lose Raj?
I think he's frozen.
Okay. So I don't know, Stephane, did you? Oh, he's back. He's back.
He's back. Yeah.
Raj,
We
did you
can hear you,
capture that
Raj.
question?
Wrong. Something went wrong with my stuff. So I can repeat that, Kathryn?
Sure thing. So one of our participants has talked about a question that they asked the CEO of Air Canada with regard to this whole idea of building out their transformation and rebuilding after the pandemic. And so the question was, do you feel that accessibility is lost in some of these innovations that we do? And his answer was, know your audience. The extra complexity brought in by digital products tends to provide barriers to seniors or those with cognitive disabilities without support. And so in your role as Shared Services Canada, can you speak to that, to the degree of this tension between, you know, making sure that you're accessible as opposed to these other priorities that come in a tech innovation process?
No, definitely, Kathryn. I think accessibility is like Stephane mentioned in the previous question as well. It's an important piece of work that we need to take into consideration in everything that we do. So if you look at the digital standards that Treasury Board published, there is a whole section on accessibility and ensuring that accessibility is something that we address as part of all digitization. It is also about knowing. Again, there is a generic accessibility controls and requirements that we need to meet, but it is also to the point where we need to understand who the audience is, and in some cases we need to tailor the solutions to the specific needs of particular individuals that need access to it. As part of it is also in some of the remote regions, they don't have access to the same type of internet connectivity and solutions that we all get at the metro areas. So how do we make sure that any programs we build is accessible from a network accessibility perspective as well? That needs to be taken into consideration as we do it. Within Shared Services Canada, actually, we do have a accessibility team that is providing. Actually, it used to be under Stephane. That is actually providing services to the rest of Government of Canada to provide the support to all the departments to ensure that we keep that at top of our list of things as we develop new programs and solutions.
And I think that's why I gave the question to you, Raj, because I think a lot of what you would do is that if you don't get accessibility right, then there's a real problem. And
exactly.
So I think not only are you coming up with those practices, but you're educating the rest of government about the best practices of doing exactly that. And that's why I find it so interesting to have this conversation with different people, because I think there is a lot of that sharing of expertise within different government sectors on different priorities with regard to tech innovation. So I loved your response to that. The next question I'm going to give to Stephane, primarily because I know he's got some finance background within government, but the question really is, looking at sort of what the banks are doing and how the banks are evolving and really the role of government to enabling change within, big regulated industries within our country. And so specifically, they want to know your take on open banking with the digital transformation program of government services. So thoughts on open banking, Stephane?
I won't. I won't say I'm an expert in open banking, but what I would say, obviously, is the government, when it comes to policies, regulation framework that we have, it is quite a challenge, right? Like, it is quite a challenge, and I think that if the government, just like open banking or anything we do within the government, is something we have to look at, is simplifying the regularity framework and policies that we have. And just to name a few, procurement processes is a great example of that, where we have an opportunity to facilitate innovation, foster collaboration between the public and the private sector. I think when it comes to that, the government must absolutely continue to work towards creating more agile, flexible regularity like environment that encourage, whether it's the banking industry or the government, experimentation and adoption of emerging technology. It is quite a challenge. Like somebody made reference to a recent event that happened in the government, which was all in the media. So while I believe that we need to continue to have like the due diligence, the right controls in place, I think there are still opportunities to increase transparency, agility, and make our processes more effective to meet that demand.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I will reiterate the idea that, I've been in this tech sector for quite some time, and so many projects I've worked on should have ended up in the media, Stephane, but the reality is they didn't, because I live in a different sector. And I think so many people focus on these, but I do appreciate the comment you're making, because the one thing I think, and this is where we're going to go on to the next question, but I really, I think one of the things the government does well is holding a duty of care for us as citizens. So the open banking question, I think a lot of us tend to think, oh, why aren't our banks more flexible, like when I travel in these different countries? But the vulnerability that exists within a lot of those open banking solutions really, is going to be driven out by industry because there's opportunity to make money. But I think the government's role is to basically have a duty of care for all of us in terms of what is defined, like what digital innovation is going to be permitted within. And that really puts government technology innovation in a very different light. And so that's how I would answer the second question, which is where I'm going to start with this one is Raj, actually. But in your opinion, what does the tech sector do well in terms of tech innovation? And, I'll do a round on that, and then maybe we'll do another round on kind of the areas where you think tech innovation with government is still struggling. So Raj, what do you think? What do you do really well in government when it comes to tech innovation?
So within the government context, I think there's a lot of areas where technology innovation is used to improve services to Canadians, to improve the internal services, and to modernize the way we work. I think a lot of many departments are pivoting towards product management. I think that's going quite well. Historically, governments do big projects very well, but when you apply that to a digital area, it doesn't work very well because in the digital space, things change rapidly, and it's very difficult to predict where we are going to be in 3 years from now with the products and the innovation that is happening in the private sector that we need to incorporate in. So planning for something that is 3 to 5 years out in this space is very, very difficult. And government usually does it very well, where it takes 3 to 5 years to actually do something, whether you're buying ships, building a real property, or you're doing big projects. It is required that we do that cadence. In the digital side of things, nimble, small initiatives that get delivered quickly, and then we iterate it going on and on. That is kind of where we are going towards. So many departments are pivoting towards that. And that's where you see a lot of innovation right now within the government context. Again, I'm time boxing this to now and what's happening compared to what was happening previously. There has been many successes within government with respect to tech innovation, but we are in a period now where I think we need to pivot towards more of agile and iterative development and delivery. And I think quite a bit of work is happening in a number of areas in government, including within shared services, to pivot from projects to product management. And I think it's very appropriate for the course that you're offering as well, Kathryn, within Queens. This is kind of where we need to go. And with respect to your question on where we are struggling on that is one, I would say, is the policies, the current policies are not fully aligned to where we need to be. And the Treasury Board is looking into this to support us. And I would also say that uh, there are many legislative and policy barriers. And I saw that firsthand when I was in Transport Canada. Many of our policies and legislation are very old. They were not built for modern digital practices. So I think any digital modernization, I think probably Ruth is experiencing this right now in what she is doing, has to incorporate the changes in the policies, changes in the legislation. And it's not a technology. Technology is a given usually, because the private sector is pretty good at doing that. I think incorporating technology into the government practices, we need to cover these angles along with user experience, user training. I think change management, and these are the areas where we have most of the I wouldn't say struggle, but quite a bit of challenges to overcome because of the way things are done within the context that we have. So maybe I think I answered a bit more than what your question was, but
That's
I think
okay.
it covers a broad spectrum of things that we are dealing with.
Well, and I just think what you did was give us the what you do well and where you struggle in the same. So I'll get the other panelists to do the same, because I think it allowed you, Raj, to get a little bit deeper into your point. And I do want to make one call out, because I really liked what you said about, there's a question in the chat around the whole idea of productization efforts, with regard to digital transformation, which draws attention to this word called product. And what I really liked in your description of that is you didn't like put it on the opposite side of projects. Like many people like project versus product. And I don't think that that is at all what we're talking about. Like we still have to do work in projects. The point you made was we have to align that into, user experience design and change management. We just have to do a better job of operationalizing those projects and embedding them into things that we do. But I just wanted to call attention to that, because oftentimes the people are like, we got to blow up projects, which I know Stephane would, disagree with fundamentally, because a lot of what we do is in projects. So we just need to figure out how to make projects not end, or to make them go on to the next thing. But I think there's new practices here that are exciting for us in the program for sure. But definitely were highlighted in your response to that. So thank you very much. So I think we will, like I said, I always go, Stephane is my anchor. So I'll go to Ruta next. And then Ruta, give us what you think you do well and where you think you struggle.
So I think what the government does really well is we have a lot of really creative and passionate people who are really developing ideas for how to make Canada better, whether it's economically, socially, environmentally, across a wide range of space. So we have great ideas. I think, implementation is sort of where there's always a gap. Like, how do we translate those ideas into the program or the service that we are delivering? And the nature of government is it's the ideas that get the most attention. And the implementation, it's kind of boring. It's not really shiny. But that's where the proof is in the pudding, for some of that. And I think like the idea of product is, I'm thrilled to hear shared services say that. I don't think that has filtered out, at least, like we're pushing it from the program side, but it's not always something that is. So I'm really looking forward, Kathryn, actually learning a little bit more about this and how I can advance it within my own project. But like I do come back to the fact that like a lot of the people with those great ideas don't actually have an understanding of products or projects. That's just not part of their vocabulary or their way of thinking. It's something that's done usually in a different branch. And so we have a lot of good people there and a lot of good people in the other branch, and bring them together on a product, I think, it is kind of an interesting and exciting thing, because project management, everybody has like their own role, but if we're all working on the same thing to drive idea or program forward. I think that brings people together a little bit better, and it helps us understand each other and our skills and values and what we bring to the project a little bit better.
Well, and it's neat because, you know, I actually spend a lot of time thinking about the role of program in digital transformation enabled by government, because everything you guys do is in a program. So to your point, I think the product management, you know, tools and techniques and embedding it into, you know, implementation, bringing the design and implementation pieces together is helpful. But it's a further conversation about whether product is the right word either, because I really don't think government's in the business of building products, right? They're building solutions. And so this is why I think in a lot of ways, government has this really unique way of kind of taking the best of project, taking the best of program, taking the best of product, and try to figure it out and create your own practices, which is why I'm excited you're coming into the program, because I think we can do that. It's just going to take us a little bit of time. So, but I think, and this is, I know Stephane's view, you know, he sat speaking to the governance side and all those kind of things. But I think, you know, being in this space, Stephane, for, you know, you guys think, you know, Stephane's 900 years old. I keep talking about his experience, but it's the idea that you've looked at this from many different perspectives. And I wonder, really, what do you think is the thing that you do the best, and then where we can struggle, and maybe why we continue to struggle in the one area you're going to talk about?
Yeah. So a lot have already been said, a really good point. So I would say on the what we've demonstrated some significant strength. When I think about digital service delivery, Kathryn, I think we've made some good progress on that front. When you think about like a lot of like, just think about like online tax filing, how it was done 20 years ago compared to today. There's a wide variety also of government portals to offer us a wide range of services to Canadian citizens. And we have like tons of digital initiatives are taking place. There's also this aspect of what do we do with our data? So like we're opening our data to our Canadian citizens. Like there's a lot of initiative in that context. So where we're more proactive, where we're promoting open data and things like that, which makes it accessible to our Canadian citizens for all sort of analysis and things like that. On the research and development, picking on what Raj said, yeah, we could do more, but I mean, we're looking at artificial intelligence, we're looking at quantum computing, clean technology. That's mandatory. We need to look at clean technology as we move forward. But if there's one thing we got better since I've started my career in the government, I found is we had a trend in the government in Canada to actually leverage technology and implement technology and system on old processes. And I think that we've learned a lot through these kind of example where we actually have started to introduce new technology, but keeping in mind that putting that on old processes might not be the way where we can be efficient, effective, and things like that. And I won't name the example of what we've seen in the past, but I think we're getting better at that. The challenges will persist, like, and I'm sure Raj could speak to that, but the government is a big organization. There's 400,000 people with tons of programs and services, and we have legacy system, tons of them. And one of the mandate that Raj has with his team is to actually look at those legacy system and modernize them. But because of those legacy system, when it comes to interoperability and adoption with new technology, it's difficult. It's very challenging. Another one that is a challenge is just cybersecurity, right? Like the speed of the cyber threats, how it evolves and things like that. We're trying to maintain and follow it and ensure robust cybersecurity are in place, that we put measure in place, but it is very, very challenging. And the last one I would say, and again, Raj made that point, it's what I call the digital divide. Canada is a large country, right? So it's hard to offer equal access when you look at the geographic and even the demographic as well. So we need to continue to work on these introducing like equalities when it comes to our technology, our services, and our program as we move forward.
Excellent. Well, it's so great. I mean, I know that the other panelists are watching the chat, so please feel free to bring in any of these ideas in here. I'm going to call attention to a couple. So Rahul talks about these super apps, and I think that this is really interesting because it comes to Stephane's point about the role of data and the fact that, you know, if government can be, you know, and enable these open data platforms to exist, you know, then it becomes, can these super apps emerge? And I agree with you, Stephane. I think that the government has created products, right? I mean, there's lots that we can point to. And then it creates this kind of thing because of your perspective, you know, is there an opportunity to create these super apps? And I feel like a lot of that lives in Raj's shop, like that whole idea of what does this look like to be somebody who's trying to navigate all the different services. But then another person, so Sylvain brings up this idea of this tension between agility and change. And then right at the end, Ahmed talks about this question, which I'm liking Ahmed more of that as I read his comments here. But what I think he's calling out here is the idea of the tension between innovation and change and mitigation of risk. So I think the whole idea becomes, to my earlier point, of, you know, there's a duty of care within technology, innovation, and government, but there's also a need for government to move the needle, right? And I think that this tension is alive and well and unique. So Raj, can you comment on that? I mean, his question specifically is asking about the idea of how you create that balance, like investment in, you know, Gen AI and twinning and all these kind of things to really push the needle, but yet stay within the financial responsibilities that you have, you know, in Shared Services Canada, spending tax dollars, as well as mitigating the risks so that we don't create harm. I mean, what does that look like from your job?
I think it's a very good question, and it's a balance that we need to achieve, right? Both from a financial perspective and also from a introducing risks and managing the risks. I think one lens we need to take is actually we experienced this during COVID when we had to expand all the services rapidly to all of Government of Canada. What is the risk of not doing this? There is a risk of doing it at a pace and at a cost that is required, but then there is a penalty that we would pay if we are not in this one. If you talk about any of the new technologies, I think I'm saying there are questions about Gen AI and AI adoption of automation and stuff like that. There is definitely risks of doing this. Privacy, cybersecurity. The most safest thing is when you have things in paper. No one can access it, including yourselves most of the time, because you have to come to a location to actually see it. But then the flexibility, the agility, and the access to things comes through digitization, through access, through connectivity. But there is a flip to it, which is the risk of cybersecurity breaches, risk of privacy breaches. So how do we balance this? How do we make sure that we are at the right balance where we are not compensating for the risks and then losing the ability to actually work? We like it or not, industry, our lives are moving more and more digital. The kids that are born now, they are born with digital tools, and they expect certain things when they come to work. We can't throw them into a paper-based services, and then they would quit. So how do we? It's a combination of multiple things that we need to take into consideration, and then I think that's why we do have governance. We do have the processes that will strike the right balance between providing the functionality and capability, and then meeting the fiduciary responsibilities with respect to finance, security, privacy, and other things. So again, it's not an easy question to answer. It all depends on the context we are in and what we are actually trying to modernize and digitize. Kathryn, if I may, I just want to make another point on the collection of different things that Government of Canada does. There was a single window question that was raised as well. There is work happening right now to look at that. The Canadian Digital Services, which is under Service Canada, they are looking into how do we present ourselves as one government to the citizens, rather than someone that needs to know, I need to go to IRCC for this, I need to go to GAC for this. I need to go to ESDC for this. So how do that becomes less more intuitive for people to go where they need to go? You see that one of the first iterations of that is the Canada.ca website. Previously, you needed to know a specific departmental website. Now you go to Canada.ca, you can actually go through multiple departments. I think there is initiative right now to look at how do we make it better by going through a single portal for applications and also a single identity. Again, we are far away from there right now, but I think there is efforts right now ongoing within the Government of Canada to enable that. Again, it's not from Shared Services Canada. We are supporting multiple organizations to do that, but just wanted to flag that.
Excellent. Well, and I will share something from your earlier point, Raj. When I was selling, so I used to work for Sun Microsystems and we sold to government. And we used to joke about how selling into government was the government had the best goalies. Whenever we had something sexy to sell, it was the government that was asking us all the hard questions. And it was always really hard to sell Flash to government. And I think that's one thing I would really like to see you guys not change. So a lot of these things, my opinion, are just hype. Right? Gen AI and all these kind of things are like, why doesn't and I think what you do really well is that you're great goalies, right? You're like, yeah, maybe you're going to have to explain us to beyond the Flash. So I just want to throw that out there because it did come from my old vendor days and we used to joke about it. But I think it's actually a very big strength that you don't let vendors kind of manipulate, get you guys to believe that this is the next big thing. And if you don't do it, we're all going to, be in trouble or have some massive risk on our hands. But the last question I do want to ask is around change. And I think there's a couple things coming out of the chat that I'd like to probe on specifically. I am going to start with Ruta because I feel like she's going to give a very different answer than Raj. So I'm going to start with Ruta. But the two things coming out in the chat for me are HR frameworks, right? So how you hire talent within the government, right? There needs to be change in that to the talent you look for in technology-based roles. And the second one really comes down to practices. So somebody's calling out low code and whether or not these low code tools are being invested in, is that something that's happening or needs to change? So those are the two big topics, Ruta, but you might suggest something different that needs to change. So over to you.
So hiring practices are tough because it's already hard enough to find, I think, in government, enough people to come and work for government within government in the IT space. I think probably, it's more on the side of hiring from the disciplines that we already hire for, but maybe putting a focus on what digital capabilities they have. And by that, I don't mean like they need to know how to do low code, no code to start. It's really about the capacity to shift and change with technology and to like see something and understand how it impacts their work and how it impacts sort of the world around them and integrate that into their analysis and the designs of their programs. Like I have I have a couple of university age kids, and when I ask them like, they're in business or their friends are in business, I say like, okay, so what are you doing on data? Like, what is data management? What are you doing there? Because, it's a big part of business and understanding your business. And they've done no courses on data. And they're going into their third year. Or, I think like, can you use Power BI? Like that's a, pretty basic thing. No, we haven't done anything on Power BI. It's sort of like an extra add-on course. So I feel like our education system could also use a little bit of a digital enablement lens, just right through all of the disciplines, because you're not going to find any workplace where those things are not that important. And equipping people to do that. So and then allowing people like me to go and take courses, like I call myself an old fart, but allowing us to take courses to be able to learn and understand this so that we can bring it back to a program area, right? So like I see my future not in the CIO or the CDO. It's still, delivering programs and services in the environmental space, but at least I'll know how to be able to do that with this. And I've been fortunate to be supported in my degree because my deputy sees the value in having people with both those skill sets. So I think, like, if anything, having more deputies, more senior managers understand that people can learn both and that you might want to train people on both would be great.
Well, it's funny, Raj, I opened that up to Ruta because I thought she was going to call out the limitations within government, and here she is calling out the limitations in academia, which I really, I think it's a valid point, right? Like, I think the whole point of digital transformation is everybody has to change. And I think, Ruta, you call out a very good point about, what's happening within higher ed and in regard to, are we training people to, to take on these digital jobs? And then calling out another challenge within academia is us working across departments. So I know for me, with the program being business and computing, those mechanisms don't really work very well within academia. And so we're having to create new ways of doing things ourselves. But I love your answer. By the way, I think it wasn't what I was expecting, but I do think that it's very true. And so, Raj, what do you think about, from your perspective as to what needs to change within government to move the needle?
I think Ruta gave the answer I was going to give. So I think that's a fundamental shift that is happening now, where digital doesn't mean IT in my mind. Digital needs to be part of everyone's business, and it is not just the technologist that is going to provide you services. And I think more and more the jobs of the CIOs will be the jobs of a CTO, and the information management, the actual management of the programs and how to digitize them. If you think about Excel 25 years ago when it first came, it was an IT solution, IT software product that only certain people knew how to use. Now everybody uses it. I think more and more with these low code and no code solutions. Actually, in transport, we implemented a citizen development framework, wherein everyone within transport could go and play with the tools in a secure way, and we had governance around how that is done. And I think many departments are doing it as well. So that's kind of where the future is going to be, I think, wherein the role of the technology providers is to provide platforms that with a well-governed security, well-governed costing frameworks and things like that. And then the tools will be given to the users to actually configure the way they can adapt it to their programs, because they know the programs well and they know their data well. So the data science is a very important aspect that will be part of that, along with building or configuring the tools to meet the program requirements. And I think Ruta pointed out quite well, like you cannot have a technical person coming and doing it for you. Like you need to have the skills to be able to do those changes. And the role of the technology people is to enable the users to actually go and make changes that they can in a secure way to provide the services to their customers.
Well, the one thing I think you'll love this, Raj. I kick off the master's program with a big slide that says "Stop blaming IT," and I follow it up with the idea that IT actually showed what it was worth when we went into COVID and we all flipped into virtual work in 48 hours. IT knows what they're doing. The whole point is the rest of the organization needs to figure out how to integrate and do our part with regard to enabling technology within. We can't second it off anymore. So I think this is a great segue for the last comment for Stephane in terms of, do you have any thoughts on kind of overall what a major takeaway of today might be?
Well, I think that, as you can see, we have our strengths and we have like spaces where we want to improve. When it comes to the government, I would say that, and especially the digital agenda that we've talked about, given the complexity around everything that we've talked about, I think, and I'm building on what you're just talking about, we need to bring all the functions across the government, not just IT, to enable that transformation, right? And I think just talking about the program, when it comes to the skills that the program has to offer in terms of knowledge and experience, etc., I think we can learn a lot from the program. And I'm going to use myself. I did this MBA like almost 15 years ago, which probably explained the gray hair. But it has allowed me to obtain not only the knowledge and the tool to manage government programs and services, but the framework on how to transform these same programs and services. So once again, I would say they need to be this collaboration, horizontal views from functional perspective. And when it comes to the academic side and the government side, it's really leveraging these type of program to enhance the strategic visioning, the data-driven decision making through analytics that we've learned on the program, the change management expertise. I remember you and I, like Kathryn, we had a lot of conversation about change management and how to transform our organization, leading change, and also, especially in the fiscal constrained environment which we are in, is how do we actually optimize the use of our resource. Like I used to be very good with finance and things like that, but I think these programs, the academic contribution, can help us to get better as we move forward by bringing in this new talent that will have gone through this program. And I'll leave it at that, Kathryn.
Great. Well, thank you. It's a perfect ending. I'm just going to get Connor to share a screen. I'll just steal one last minute of your time. It does pull out to what Ruta was talking about. But another thing we're trying to work on in collaboration with the Ivy Business School is this Digital Futures Symposium. And so we do have other government leaders on this. But what this speaks to is the need for Canada to build a future in digital. We have to connect or better integrate academia with practice and government. And so it really does speak to new programs, new ways of doing things, new ways of innovating. And I feel like if we keep talking about like tech innovation in government, Ruta calling out, program innovation in academia, until we're all in the same room and can talk about it at the high senior levels of the organization, we're not going to move at all. And so this is something, if it interests you, please do find me on LinkedIn. We've got this kind of going. The website for this is going to come out in the next couple of days, but this is sort of the next step to how we're trying to carry this conversation forward. Now, I do want to thank our panelists. I will make a commitment that we will be back next year with a new and improved, third annual Tech Innovation in Government. This is one of our most successful webinars that we do all year. And so it would not be nearly the quality it was without Raj and Ruta and Stephane. So thanks to all of you for participating and spending your lunch hour with us. And we will follow up with the video, and any questions that you may have that we didn't get to, we'll also make documentation of those. And so if there's anything that's left unsaid, you can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. But thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.